Hi, my name's Chris. I'm a French teacher at We Communicate, and my claim to fame is to have told 10,000 people not to retire in France. How's that? It's sod's law, isn't it? I put out these videos on YouTube, and the one that gains traction is the same that has people say, well, he's a mopey bugger, isn't he? Why can't he just leave us alone and do our own thing as expats and retire in France as we want and not learn French? So that one's been watched 10,000 times. Thank you, YouTube. And but also it's a bit frustrating because I put out a brilliant video on the subjunctive that somehow proved that I can teach French, and that one's been watched less than 500 times. I'm thinking it's all in the title. Maybe I should have called it The Risks of Not Learning the Subjunctive or something, to add a bit of danger element to it. So in this video I'm going to give you two pieces of unexpected advice. If you're an adult wanting to learn French, here are two pieces of advice from experience that you might not have heard before. Let's start. Piece of advice number one might seem a bit overly cautious, but I would admit to myself, in the best of faith, that there is at least a possibility, a strong possibility, that I don't quite know what I need to accomplish in order to learn French. And I think I'd gather the courage to look at myself in the mirror and say, Chris, you're a great guy, you have many qualities, but you really just don't know. You have to admit it, Chris. You have to be strong. You have to admit that. Look at yourself in the mirror, Chris, and tell yourself you really don't know what you need to accomplish in order to learn French. What does this piece of advice mean? Well, it means that Chris, who's about to learn Tagalog or Italian, for example, or Croatian, doesn't quite know what he's in for. And I'll emphasize the words, what he's in for. What am I in for? And if I don't know what job I'm in for, there is also a high probability that I don't know what tool I need. And this is why I run the risk of picking up the first tool I find from that toolbox. And this is also why everyone ends up on a certain large-scale language platform which shall remain anonymous, only to realize later that language learning isn't exactly what they thought it would be. I have to say there is no shame. I don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable. I consider that we are in a safe place, we're in a safe space, we're in a non-judgmental area, and there's absolutely no shame to say the D word. You know, I know what it's like. You know, I've used the D word. It's the D word. I know there's no shame. I've done it also. I mean, we can speak about it. It's not like being a closet communist or something like that. It's like that's harder to speak about in public. What often happens is that the students, understandably, who don't quite know what they're in for or what tool they need to perform the job, will often jump to base one, and base one is the D word that we don't like to talk about. It's like sort of the family shame. But they'll find themselves on base one, and then they'll often jump to base two. So base two is, well, same sort of thing, but a bit more prestigious, really. So you sort of graduate from base one to base two, and you go, well, it's the same sort of learning platform, but it seems a bit more serious. It's a more prestigious name, and it often has the name of a celebrity teacher attached to it. And this is what I've seen from experience. I mean, I'm not making this up, that there is a cyclic narrative. There really is. And I've seen this based on experience, speaking to students of all ages, that there is this cyclic narrative. You know, you jump from one base to the other. So the first base is the D word, which I'll remain anonymous. Second base is something that's perceived as a bit better, perhaps, right? Third base is another thing, still a bit better, but a bit different perhaps, because we realised that base one didn't work, base two is sort of, doesn't really work that well either, base three, try something else. And here we are 3 or 4 years later, and it's a sad narrative, and I mean, I'm not making light of this, I'm not making fun of this, it's a bit of a sad narrative. But often 3 or 4 years later we find ourselves still not speaking French, and well, there's usually a base 4, and I often find myself in the place of base 4. It's funny, I'm often base 4, and other language teachers also. So base 1 to 4, I'm often base 4. Now this regrettable scenario could happen to Chris also. Of course it could, unless he says, I just don't know. I really just don't know, Chris. I have no idea, which is why Chris is going to force himself to have the courage to say, I don't know. I really don't know what it means to learn French. I don't know what it entails, right? And it's going to be hard. It's going to be really hard. I'm going to dislike that walk up to the mirror. I'm going to hate it. It's a very hard walk to take. It really is. And you're going to have to drag me kicking and screaming up to the mirror and put my face in front of it. And I'm going to have to say these words. It's going to be horrible. I'm going to have to say, I don't know. I just don't know. But it has to be done. It has to be done. That's the first step. It has to be done. You have to face that mirror. So advice number one, if you don't have the presentability, because you might have it later, if you don't have the presentability to understand the scope of the task ahead, so here you are, there's French over there, what is the scope of the task ahead? If you don't have the presentability to understand that, it is going to be quite hard to solve it, and you and I can agree on that, I think. So Chris, who might want to learn Tagalog or Croatian or Italian or Lithuanian, anything, doesn't know either. I don't know either. And Chris, unbeknownst to himself, might be reaching for a pair of roller skates when he's about to cover 200 miles. That's the distance ahead of me, 200 miles, but I'm happily grabbing my roller skates and saying, let's go. It's just the wrong tool for the job. It's the wrong tool for the job. Now, the experienced traveller who sees me on my little rusty roller skates going, that's the sound of a rusty roller skate. The experienced traveller who sees me by the side of the road going on my 200-mile travel in my rusty roller skates is going to shake his head and say, Chris, if only you knew, if only you knew. What you need is a jetpack, or at the very least a car. And this was true for me too. It's potentially true if I were to pick up a new language, but it was true also in the past, because I learned German at university. And I can tell you from experience, I didn't know what it meant. I had no idea what it meant to learn German. I had already learned Dutch in school. I'd already taken 12 years of Dutch, so I had a fair idea how that worked. But I had no idea what it meant to learn German. And what does it entail to learn German? That's really the key word. What does it entail to learn German? And the definition of German is more complex than a language that's used by speakers of German. It's more complex than that. There are depths to it. There are many things, for example, I never suspected existed about German. And that's the 200-mile travel I'm speaking about. And if you're presently learning French, I dare suggest, I dare believe that there's a possibility at least that there is a whole world of things you might not suspect exist concerning the French language. And you too might need more than a pair of rusty roller skates to cover that distance. I've seen you on your way there, and I've come back from the finishing line, and we cross paths, and I say, oh, is that where you're going? Oh, I can tell you, you need to drop these roller skates. That's not going to get you there. You see, I think you can trust the wisdom of the seasoned traveller who sees you on the way there. You have to imagine, I have in mind one of those empty roads in the desert of Arizona, one of these American highways, in Nevada. Can you picture it? So here I am, coming back from the finishing line and seeing you on the way there and saying, well, if that's where you're going, it's a longer road than you think. That's my little piece of wisdom to you. So the first step is all about admitting to ourselves a lack of understanding of the job ahead. And I think it's a reasonable thing to do. It means that there's a possibility you don't yet know the nature of the beast. And we can speak practically to illustrate this. For example, how do we define the French language? What definition would you put onto the French language? What's the substance of it? What's the substance of French? How is French different from English? What does it mean to be a speaker of French? What's the tipping point? What's the stage at which you can consider yourself a speaker of French? What are the difficulties when it comes to learning French? What are the common pitfalls? What are the things that are important and that I might not know exist as a learner of French? How big is the map of French, and where are you standing, and where do you need to get to? These are not simple questions to answer, especially if you're at the starting line, about to cover those 200 miles. And we can do a quick test just now. Do you think, this is my test question to you, do you think that there's a hierarchy within the French sounds? Do you think that certain French sounds are more important than others? Do you think there's a hierarchy? Have you noticed this to be a fact in your learning of French? I'm just talking about the sounds. Do you think we can work out a hierarchy? Do you think it's a real thing to say? Do you think it's a correct thing to say? Has your teacher or your current method of learning mentioned anything about this? I won't answer. I won't tell you what the answer is. And you'll have, I think I'll give the answer in the next video, so you'll have to watch another video of mine before you know. Do you think that within all the French sounds there's a hierarchy? Are certain French sounds more important than others? And this illustrates the things that you might not know about French or not suspect exists. So this is the first of two pieces of advice, and we can call it the mirror test, or call it the mirror test. This is Chris being dragged along, kicking and screaming, doesn't want to face the mirror, doesn't want to admit that he might not know what awaits him, he might not have an informed opinion about the nature of French, and facing that mirror. We'll call it the mirror test. That's the first of two. Now, as a second step, as a second piece of advice, if I were to learn a new language starting tomorrow, I would absolutely write down a little personal statement. I will take 2 minutes and write down exactly why I want the language. I would absolutely do that. And I would also write down how much I want it, why I want the language and how much I want it. And I would examine my level of commitment. And the reason I would do that is because learning languages, as other things in life, it's a mental game. It really is a mental game. It's all about the frame of mind in which you approach it. And I do realise that most coaches that we see on the internet, on YouTube, skip this step entirely. And it should be my role too, as a purveyor of services, if I had any business sense, of course. But these coaches have in common that they all train you to do the result, the noticeable result. How to walk faster, how to grow your biceps, how to attract sexual partners, how to appear more self-assured, how to lose weight. And the message is really, if you follow my guidance, you can do it too. But this is only partially true. If you're in the habit of listening to coaches or mentors, you might have noticed that only the very best in the world talk about your mental game. It's quite noticeable. I'm talking about the Bob Proctors of this world, the Earl Nightingales, the Jim Rohn, the Zig Ziglar, the Grant Cardone. They're almost all American because, well, let's be honest, it's not really a European thing, it's mostly an American thing, but all these people will always talk about your frame of mind. What's going on upstream, not downstream, not the noticeable result. What's going on upstream, they all talk about this. These public speakers, the mentors, the teachers, all tell their learners to do the same thing. I'm talking about the very best of them. They all tell their learners to do the same thing. Look at your frame of mind. Be aware of the frame of mind in which you're doing the thing. Don't go downstream. Don't just imitate the actions. Don't go through the motions, because it's really the frame of mind that decides of everything. So look at the frame of mind with which you're performing the action. And it's usually, frankly, the quacks who tell you to just perform the action and that everything will be easy. If you do like me, you can be like me. It's the quacks that say that. It really is. That's what I've observed separates the great coaches from the others. They'll talk to you about what's going on upstream, what your frame of mind is, not just downstream, imitate my actions and be like me. In your statement, you can really write down what you want. It doesn't really matter, but having a statement, I think, is important. You can even say, I'm not that much interested in French, I'm just learning French to annoy the neighbour who's always trying to one-up me. And the advantage of making this personal statement is that then you can choose your source of learning knowingly. And this is where it gets important. I would personally want to have harmony between my desire and the way I learn, the tools I'm using in order to learn. So just yesterday, a gentleman phoned me. He wants to do French classes, obviously, and it's a beautiful story. He told me about his project, which was to settle in Quebec, because he fell in love with a lady from Quebec, and he wants to be able to communicate with his in-laws and settle in Quebec, so he speaks English, and that's his project. But what I got out of it is that his motivation is very high. His sense of urgency is very high. And he realized that it required a certain tool for the job. Because he thought about his problem, his mission, and he knew it took a certain tool. So a pair of roller skates wasn't going to get him to Quebec, right? And after trying, as we all do, there's no shame, I've said it before, it's a safe space, but after trying base 1, 2 and 3, well, he phoned base 4 and essentially told me what I'm doing now, as in terms of learning French, isn't getting me where I need to be. And by the way, I'm also guessing that he did the mirror test. I didn't ask him, but I'm fairly sure he did. Because he tried base 1, 2 and 3, he phoned base 4, and I think he looked at his mission, he said, well, this is my desire, this is test number 2, he looked at his desire to learn French, well, what is he doing? Where do you need to get to? And he did the mirror test, and he asked himself, well, what do I really know about learning French? I've tried all these things, but what do I know about it? And I think he came to the conclusion that really he couldn't know. He didn't know what it meant to learn French, and this is why he phoned me. He tried alone, he used whatever came up on page 1 of Google, and then he came to the conclusion, I don't know what I'm doing. I really don't, and I don't have time for this. I need to get to Quebec. But if Chris wanted to learn a language with intent, and he had a burning desire, he would have to look at the tools he's holding. And I think here the expression, bring the knife to a gunfight, takes all its meaning. And I think that this self-examination, this sort of self-assessment you make, by writing down a personal statement, can open up crucial answers. For example, you can look at whatever tool you're presently using and ask yourself if it seems like the right tool for the job. Is it the tool of someone with a burning desire, with a lukewarm desire, or with no desire at all? I think we could call it the hot or cold test. That's the name we'll give to this second test, the hot or cold test. So there we have it. This concludes this video. 2 unexpected pieces of advice if I had to learn a language tomorrow. We have the mirror test and we have the hot or cold test. And to recap, question number 1, do I have absolute certainty that I know what the job entails? Do I know where I'm standing on the language map? And number 2, how much do I want it? What's the nature of my desire, and is my current way of learning the one that will bring me to where I want to be? These are 2 honest pieces of advice that I would follow myself if I had to learn a language tomorrow, and I think have the potential of saving you a lot of disappointments and wasted time even. I tried to be practical as much as I could in this video, but again, learning a language is a mental game and it can be hard to put into actionable steps. I did my best. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it helps you. My name's Chris. Goodbye.